Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents The Snowman's Children, a novel, by Glen Hirshberg, narrated by Joe Hempel. Part 1. 1994. In the dark, through the stinging sleet, the lightless buildings of downtown Detroit seem to tilt toward each other like sunken ships on the ocean floor. The street lamp bulbs have all blown, so that everything wavers in the hissing shadows. Even the traffic lights float like buoys cut adrift to ride the Friday night ghost current. I have the window cracked open despite the cold. All I hear is the furtive slosh of tires and a faint industrial whistling. At first glance, this place looks exactly the way I left it 19 years ago. Or maybe it's just the new snow having its usual effect on me. A long blue Buick coughs to life, pulling out from a row of apparently abandoned cars, its driver hunched forward in the cone of illumination from the dome light. She doesn't look my way as she slides past. On the corner, a decapitated lamppost sticks sideways in the cement, next to a tiny grocery with a hanging sign in Arabic and its electrified sliding door halfway open. I see figures moving up and down the aisles, carrying boxes. They could be looting, or restocking, or relocating, or scavenging. Slowly I turn for the woodward corridor. The snow is already gray, and the smell of earthy air washes through the window. Disabled cars line the roadway, and I weave carefully between them as if I'm following an unseen lead vehicle out of the city toward Troy. I've got my own Trojan horse, too. A rented 1986 Olds with 78,000 miles on it and no defrost. I actually asked the guy at the rent-a-wreck if he had any gremlins. Blue ones. "Huh?" he said, and gave me a towel for the windshield. I turn on the radio and find WJR, which is running the headlines. Woman with Alzheimer's found locked in an East Detroit house with 14 dogs. Police currently searching for her son. Execution-style shooting on Gratiot. Wings win in San Jose. Then it's out to another roving reporter who is holding his microphone into the night. "There," he says. "Hear it?" And you really can hear it. The road's breaking apart like ice over a lake. "It's the thaw," says the reporter. "Yesterday's unexpected balmy weather after 2 months of sub-zero temperatures has affected the roads, and even though we're back to freezing tonight, the asphalt is already split and cars are plunging into the potholes." Not until 9 Mile do the landmarks get familiar, and only a few, even then. The Detroit Zoo water tower materializes dimly out of the dark over Ferndale. If I took a left, a right, drove 5 more blocks, I'd be at Spencer's house, where all 3 of us growled in our sleeping bags on the night the lions jumped over the zoo's retaining wall and escaped. That was early winter, 1976, before almost any of it. I've driven past the corner where Minnie Mike's slot car emporium used to be before I think to look up. But I already know it won't be there. And the only letter she ever sent us, maybe 2 years after we were gone, a greeting, 5 cryptic lines about finalizing her divorce and having trouble with her car heater in the frigid weather, nothing at all about her son except that he seemed distant, still very angry and hurt, but okay sometimes. Spencer's mother enclosed an article about Minnie Mike's heart attack and the emporium's closing. Across the top she had scrawled, "Just thought you'd want to see this." She also included a magazine photograph of Dr. Doherty standing on a podium in front of a small crowd at Phil Hart Plaza downtown, accepting an Outstanding Motor City Citizen Award. My mother showed the photograph to me, took it back and murmured, "Son of a bitch," over it as though praying or proclaiming a curse. Then she lit it on fire. The girl at the Troy-Birmingham Moto Court is pretty, ponytailed, not yet 20. She's popping grocery store sugar cookies into her mouth and listening to music that bubbles the pads of her headphones. She doesn't flinch when I sign at the register, after only a slight hesitation. My real name. Why should she flinch? And why should I care? She would have been maybe 2 years old then. And it's not as if I killed anybody. Not quite. 1976. It started during the week of my 5th Mind War. John Goblin had ruptured his appendix, almost died, and wound up in the hospital most of the winter, which is why I was the only boy at Teresa Doherty's 11th birthday party. All that snow, hip deep, as though the clouds had snagged themselves on the earth and unraveled. The ice crust on top of the drift sliced into my calves as my feet sunk downward. I was staggering toward Teresa's, head down to protect my eyes from the wind, passing the birch trees the neighborhood kids had picked barkless. From the bus stop at the end of our block, I could see her porthole window through the maples. Shapes moved behind the glass. Not faces or even bodies, just shapes. And in the silence, in the snow, I felt like a fish swimming up to nuzzle the hull of a ship. A remora, perhaps. I'd read about them over and over in my Strange True Fish Tales book, mistaking this house for a whale. Teresa opened the front door. Behind her, the first of her father's masks, black and horned, scowled from the wall. Healing masks, Dr. Doherty called them. He'd accepted, often requested them, he told us, as tokens of appreciation when he'd served as a self-described idealistic young physician on various Native American reservations and while traveling in Peru and Kenya. The masks were meant to scare the bacteria out of you. They hung all over the walls at peculiar angles because, according to Dr. Doherty, sickness slinks and slouches. There's not a virus in the world that'll come at you upright. Once you knew what they were, they should have been comforting. But every time I entered that house, I felt helpless, paralyzed. All those carved faces with no eyes and misshapen mouths made me freeze, then tremble. Not, I think, because of the masks themselves, but because of the terrifying things their existence suggested were loose in the air, things that could sneak inside you. Jerking my attention from the walls, I looked at Teresa. She was wearing white, but white what I don't recall. White with a black ribbon through her short blonde hair. I can't tell you much about her face. Even then, before any of it, except the death of her mother years earlier, her eyes seemed to lurk under their lids and then flash at you, way too far into you. I didn't do much looking at people's faces back then, but I knew that Teresa's eyes, when they flashed at you, were brown and eerily opaque, the color of rain on the ground. She had a little extra cheek on both sides, and her mouth was always arched and poised like a bow. Around the room, 10 other girls, mostly from our class at school, sat clumped in their usual groups on the white leather couches or the shag carpet that rose to meet them like a luxuriant lawn. It was the first time I'd been there without John Goblin. They were family friends, the Goblins and Dohertys, and celebrated holidays together. The dawning awareness that he wasn't coming thrilled through me, freed me for a while from the glare of the masks. "Happy birthday," I found myself saying to Teresa, and smiled. Quite possibly that was the first thing I'd said to her in a month. The year before, by unspoken agreement among all the members of our class, we'd begun to rearrange our desks by gender so we could nurse our newly awakened awkwardnesses from a comforting distance. I might have gone on and said something else, because I felt all but sure, for once, that she was happy to see me. But as I held up the birthday present I'd brought her, Dr. Doherty stepped smoothly between us. "Maddie, welcome. Way too long since we've seen you. Look, Thurgirl, a gift from the arch-rival." He took my present, shook it, and slipped it into the pocket of his cardigan. When his hand reappeared, it had a popcorn ball in it. "Pre-mind war eats," he said, and tousled my hair, then walked away. I remembered his face so fiercely that I sat down and drew it one night in high school, several years later and thousands of miles away. The drawing got me into Parsons. He was bald, and his skull shone like the hood of a car. He had the least liquid eyes I'd ever seen, metallic gray, and they looked screwed into their sockets. Nothing he tried, not what he called his friendly guy mustache, not his Mr. Rogers sweaters, not his relentless smiling, did anything to soften him. "It's a decal," I told Teresa. My voice shrank into my turtleneck, away from Dr. Doherty's masks. "For the people-eater?" she asked quietly, glancing over her shoulder, but grinning. "It says fear in little rub-off letters. I designed it myself. It'll fit on the bumper or the grill." Teresa's father had given her the people-eater, a custom slot car, for Christmas, which was a surprise, since he hadn't yet allowed her to come racing with Joe Whitney, John Goblin, and me. She named it for the Minnesota Vikings front line and the pickle sandwich at Avery's Deli on Long Lake. It was faster than any of the cars the rest of us rented at Minnie Mike's slot car emporium, but Teresa couldn't drive it very well. "I made the popcorn balls," she said. I tried mine. It cracked open like a frozen apple. Red, watermelon-flavored juice trickled into my mouth. If you spit these, they'll stick, I announced. Before she could dare me, the way she used to do in second grade when we sat together at the brain table, Dr. Doherty materialized again in the dining room doorway. Will the co-favorites take their marks, please? His smile made me shudder. Over his shoulder, against the plate glass window that ran the length of the living room, I could see the table that had been prepped for the mind war. 12 chairs, 5 on each side for the birthday guests and 1 at either end for Teresa and me, so we could stare each other down. Pads of scratch paper had been placed before each chair, as well as a calculator, pocket dictionary, and 2 Ticonderoga pencils, the kind with the tips that splintered if you pushed too hard. The honor feather rested atop my pad of paper because I'd won last year, for the first time since I was 6. Watch out for him, my mother had warned me at breakfast. She meant Teresa's father, and I knew it. He'll do anything if it means helping her win. I don't trust him. I never have. Still in their clumps, the rest of Teresa's guests slipped off the couches and drifted toward the table like debris being washed into a gutter. A few of them glanced at Teresa or me. Only a couple of them smiled. They looked the way I almost always felt, vaguely intimidated by something I couldn't quite name. At age 11, Teresa already had a game face. Bow mouth drawn taut, eyes narrowed. Even her hair seemed curled into a fist. John Goblin's mother called it the 1,000-yard squint. Teresa wore that face in the super advanced math program we got excused from our 5th grade class to go to every morning at 10:30. She wore it the whole week of the Young Poets of America contest. She even wore it in art class during Clay Project Month when she had no chance of beating me. Maddie man, Dr. Doherty said. Thur girl, ready? The squint had settled over her, but hadn't hardened yet when I opened my mouth and said, Tell him no, I dare you. I don't know why I said that. I liked the mind war, but I liked the thought of sabotaging it with Teresa's help even better. Of course, Dr. Doherty could have dismissed my little coup attempt with a wave of his hand, but he didn't. He just folded his arms over his chest, leaned against the wall next to one of his masks, and waited, watching his daughter. For a moment, something bloomed beneath the surface of the squint, naked and colorless. I told my mother about it later. She shivered and shook her head. Don't worry, Maddie, Teresa finally said, her smile even chillier than her father's. Runner-up gets all the popcorn balls he can eat. Her father patted her arm, and I shrugged and nodded. At the time, I still considered myself a legitimate threat to what I'd once heard the doctor call the Doherty superiority. I knew I wasn't her equal anymore, but a threat, surely. I took my spot at the table with the others, brushed the honor feather forward, and one of the girls next to me poked at it with her pencil, then looked across the table at a friend and snickered. If she'd looked at me, I might have snickered too. I liked the game, but not the feather, which was pink and puffy and meant mostly that I was a target for humiliation. But no one was looking at me except the doctor and his daughter. And the teeth mask. Now, I could be wrong about this. I don't think I am, but I could be. Back in second grade when Teresa and I played together in each other's backyards almost every afternoon, I slipped on some leaves and fell on a rake in the Doherty's neighbor's yard, and I ended up laying inside the Doherty house with my eyes squeezed shut for almost an hour while the doctor tended to the gash on my forehead. As I remember, he sent Teresa out of the room so she wouldn't have to watch. Then he stroked my hair and said occasional reassuring things. The blood kept welling out of the rent in my skin and into my eyebrows before he wiped it away. Letting things cleanse, he said. I didn't scream. Don't think I said a single word until I opened my eyes. The teeth mask was white except for the teeth, which were black and long and looked less like teeth than needles jammed into the red-lined gums in the lipless mouth. There were no eyes in the white sockets, so the thing seemed to be gazing inward, rolling every piece of itself as far away from pain as it was possible to get and still, for a few more seconds, be alive. For the next 3 years, every time I turned out the light, I saw the teeth mask flash in the last split second of not dark. It is possible that the doctor treated me on his dining room table or on the rug underneath it, and I'm just remembering wrong, but I think we were on his living room couch, and I think the mask was hanging over it, and I think he moved it, on Teresa's 11th birthday, to the one place where he knew I would see it. Despite what my mother may have thought and sometimes said, Dr. Doherty would never, ever have given Teresa hints about upcoming mind war questions. He would have considered that insulting to his daughter. But he wasn't above employing the home field advantage. "Boys and girls," the doctor said. "Ready?" I just stared at the mask while the snow ticked against the window pane, and everyone else picked up their pencils to try, at least. I wanted to look away, kept telling myself to do so, but I couldn't shake my eyes free. Those empty sockets drew my gaze like black holes sucking in light. Distantly, I heard the doctor take a long breath and begin. 1/12 times -1/18. -1/216th, Teresa said before anyone's pencil had touched paper. She hadn't even reached for her own. The doctor made a scratch on the score sheet and continued. The whole point of the speed round was to obliterate the non-competitive. I was still stunned to paralysis by that fanged and leering face, unprepared. "Reporters for the Washington Post to Bernstein, Woodward," said Teresa. Another scratch. "Inaugurate. Define it, spell it." This was particularly cruel because 9 months later, in the midst of the election, everyone in the room could have answered it. Now everyone would remember that Teresa Doherty knew it, and knew how to spell it first. By the time I shook out of my stupor and beat Teresa to a Michigan geography question about Mackinac Island, it was already too late. I snatched up my pencil and ignored the calculator. If you had to use it, you were already doomed, and began burying the rest of my classmates as we raced into the word problem round. I didn't get anywhere near catching up to Teresa, but I did look at her once, not far from the finish, and without thinking about it, I grinned. She immediately grinned back. Then the next question flew, and we hurtled after it. Later, in the last of the twilight, Dr. Doherty took us all skating on Cider Lake. Teresa glided far ahead while I lagged behind. I was happy to be out of the gaggle of girls and stumbling along on my own until I fell and found myself face down on the ice with my eyes jammed shut. No matter what, I did not want to look into the lake. When I opened my eyes, I saw ice, gray and opaque as steel. My father once told me that this was a man-made lake, which I took to mean that swimmers somehow had left parts of themselves behind in it. After that, being in the water didn't scare me as much as being over it, on skates, did. I didn't want anything reaching through the surface to grab me. More than that, I didn't want to see anything under there that could. Shoving down with my mittens, I scrambled to my feet and slipped once more after the vanishing partygoers. The Snowman had come, although no one was calling him that yet. No one had named a task force after him or held special assemblies about him at school. No psychologists had developed profiles, and no one had offered any speculation about what he was doing with his victims during the days, sometimes weeks, between the moments he took them and the moments he left them lifeless but unmarked, in tidy bundles in the snow. 1994. Back in Louisville, Laura will be waiting, in the paint-spattered overall shorts she slips into every night after dinner. She'll have her banjo across her knees in bed. She only practices her banjo in bed. And a rolling rock on the nightstand, her dark hair pinned back under a black and red bandana. I know she's expecting me to call. My own fault, really. I've become unexpectedly good at the mechanics of marriage. Surprise dinners, hugs from behind while we're doing the dishes, bringing my wife another rolling rock before I go downstairs to draw. My parents in Lexington will be waiting, too, and they will not be pretending otherwise. My mother, especially, didn't want me to come back here. She told me I was being that way again. By that way, she means fixated and daydreaming, under what she terms the misapprehension that Detroit has any relevance whatsoever to the mess she worries that I'm making of my life. I dial my own number and wait. 3 rings. 4. I'm almost hoping Laura's not home yet, that the bluegrass band she plays with at the Secretariat Club 6 nights a week had a hot show, and she's churning through an encore right now, stage flirting through the smoke with that lingering laugh that comes from somewhere I can't reach. And later, she'll punch the answering machine and find my voice and know that I called her right away. Because I did. I am calling right away. Our answering machine has neither of our voices, just Laura playing her banjo, followed by a beep. It's me, I say, and before I can say I miss you, I'm sorry, I'm cold, the roads have split open, and the earth underneath is frozen and black, Laura's voice fills the line. You forgot to pay the phone bill. I'm sorry. You're always sorry, Maddie. The ensuing silence is long, familiar. I can hear her breathing. I can see her overall straps rise and fall, feel the snaps come open in my hands. I can smell her beer and banjo resin smell. 1,000 miles away, in her bed, in her room, in her life, Laura starts to hum. Blue Moon of Kentucky, keep on shining. She's humming the high harmony part, the one she sings on stage. It sounds eerie up there all by itself, like bat sonar closing in. I start to ask how her show was. Stop. I start to explain again why I had to come here, why this weekend by myself in this place was the only thing I wanted for my birthday. But all of the explanations lack clarity, even to me, and none of them fill even a corner of the empty space we've cultivated between us for almost 7 years. I've never told you the story behind the wanted drawings, have I? I say abruptly, and the humming doesn't stop, but she's there, listening. Or she's gone, and it's too late. Either way, I have to tell her this. Laura, shine on the one who's gone and left me blue, she hums, without, I'm sure, any extra intended meaning. There's not a song in her repertoire that wouldn't dig at me tonight. The nature of bluegrass. I close my eyes and watch as all those disembodied hands slip effortlessly from the places where I've buried them and crawl across the last 2 decades to claim me. 1985. By junior year, I had firmly established myself at the bottom of my class at Parsons, an illustrator at best with a whimsical streak and no genius whatsoever. In October, at the suggestion of a disinterested prof, I designed my first planned community, 7 ordinary subdivision homes with swimming pools and high-back fences, except that these back fences all had secret openings triggered by springboards that flew up or slid sideways on rollers or leapt out of line into the bushes. Owners were encouraged to decorate and disguise their entrances to suit their own tastes. The idea, I wrote when I presented the thing, was to reconstruct the community by unblocking its arteries so that kids, the lifeblood of any subdivision, could flow freely through it. I got my first B on that project. The grade was a gift, really, because the whole thing was pretty banal, and even the fences were naive. But I think members of the distinguished faculty were relieved. They'd finally found a pursuit for me that they could, in good academic conscience, recommend, and they probably thought that my movement in such a utilitarian, as opposed to fervently artistic, direction would weaken my friendship with Scuzzy Lee. Once, and once only, I went home with Scuzzy to his mother's place in Martinsville, New Jersey. The house had huge glass bird feeders suspended from each corner of the sloping, slatted roof, so the eaves were perpetually haunted with sparrows. Scuzzy's parents, his father was a geographer, his mother a painter, had come to this country from China in the early 70s as part of a cultural exchange program at Rutgers. Only his mother had stayed, keeping young Scuzzy with her. I have no idea whether she defected or emigrated or what, and when I asked, Scuzzy seemed confused about the difference. I also have no idea where her money came from, but she apparently had plenty of it. She wore paint frocks and black skirts and black tights and wouldn't look at me at all. She talked incessantly to Scuzzy, following him through rooms, up and down flights of stairs, chattering in Chinese. He rarely answered. Instead, he conducted conversations in English with me right over her shoulder. But he'd look at her sometimes, in the middle of whatever we were doing, and she would stop talking for a moment or two. Sometimes Scuzzy would laugh, but she never did. Despite the way he dressed at school, 70s vintage black leather jackets with big buttons and belts that hung off the back, spandex pants, dress shoes with enormous heels that tilted him forward so that he always looked as if he was being forklifted, Scuzzy's nickname had nothing to do with his appearance. It had grown out of a verbal tic. Instead of saying because, he said "Biscuz" in response to practically anything anyone ever asked him. Whether it was a childhood habit or a deliberate choice, I never knew. but I always thought it suited what he and I both recognized as his peculiarly art school sort of brilliance. Late at night, careening on coffee and ecstasy and spasms of brain energy, he'd erupt out of bed with a canvas under his arm, hurtle past the hall denizens stretched across the floor with their clove cigarettes dangling from their lips and blank sketch pads propped open on their laps, dart through the dregs of us clumped on couches in the TV lounge, then disappear into the laundry room and lock the door. Hours later, he would emerge with pieces of abstract art that positively vibrated color, veins of obscene orange snaking through reds and tans that gave out 2/3 of the way across the canvas. My favorite, called Crush, was a sort of collapsing iceberg of sea greens swooning into blue, plunging toward black, and finally collapsing off the bottom of the frame. It used to hang over my bed in Louisville, but Laura couldn't sleep with all that color crashing down on her. Now it hangs in our hallway, safely shrouded in perpetual shadow. Scuzzy and I became friends on the first day of school, freshman year. I gave him the top bunk so he wouldn't bang his head when he lunged awake in the middle of the night with his brushes in his fist. We stayed friends, I think, because Scuzzy's knowledge of his own inevitable failure as an artist pained him, physically, to the point of paralysis, whereas the ongoing confirmation of my more evident lack of vision came as a profound relief, and was very possibly the reason I chose to pursue art in the first place. I'd managed to get as far from mind wars and brain tables as I could. So we went on rooming together, eating together and failing together in separate ways. Scuzzy painted, took drugs, accumulated accolades from the faculty. I curled up comfortably in his wake and stayed unnoticed. And whenever Scuzzy wasn't painting, we went to the track. That winter, Manhattan stayed weirdly warm all through January while the rest of the country wrestled with snow. In the TV lounge, my fellow Weather Channel junkies and I would watch the AccuMap in hypnotized fascination. State lines blurred and faded. Mountains sank to their shoulders in the relief landscape. It seemed as though every city but Manhattan had been erased. I was the only one still in the lounge on the morning that Scuzzy emerged from the laundry room with his hands clenched into claws and his hair dyed the color of a bruise. He looked as if he'd been dipped into one of his paintings. "Mati," he said with more pronounced Oriental shading than usual. "Aqueduct." Bleary-eyed, I squinted at his hair, then back at the TV. "Can't," I told him, and gestured at the AccuMap. "The snow ate it." "You bet with me today," he said, limping down the hallway, first on one leg, then the other, heels tipping him all too soon into the future. Outside Manhattan, the subway emptied quickly. Our only companions were college students bundled into city-stained ski jackets and scarves, an old guy in a fedora singing Eastern European folk songs, and one black mother whose kids whirled to the window every time the train rose above ground. The snow lifted off the abandoned buildings and rubble-strewn lots and settled down again like furniture covering in a deserted house. I watched the kids and shivered backward 10 years into the drainage ditch at the bottom of our yard where I had lain in the drifts, head with Spencer Franklin and Teresa Doherty, playing Dead Things Rising from the Grave. They'd found several of the Snowman's victims face down in ditches, their bodies warm enough that the paramedics had tried to revive them. By the time we reached Aqueduct, I was already remembering the hands. I started to tell Scuzzy about them as we exited the train, which flew from the station in a sucking sort of rush, like air expiring into space. "In Detroit," I said to Scuzzy's back, feeling a disconcerting pressure in my stomach. "When I walked home from school—" Suddenly he stopped and leaned against the side of the stairway with his hands on his knees. "Scuzzy, are you all right?" I asked. "I reek." He was talking about his art, I knew, and by then he had almost used up the venom he could inject into that word. "I reek worse." "Today you bet with me." It was the second time he'd said it. He needed to win, or maybe lose, with someone today. Anyway, he was leaving me no choice. If I didn't bet with him, he wouldn't translate any of the conversations around us. "Will they come today?" I asked him. He shrugged, winced, started up the stairs again. We paid our $5 and passed through the turnstile into the clubhouse, which shared its smell of electrified urine with every other public building connected to the subway. I followed behind, shaking my tingling hands, looking for Chinese women. To this day, I don't know if they go to Aqueduct all the time or only on specified.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?